us all that we may.
The human voice, what a wonderful instrument. Man's principal means of communication since time immemorial. We laugh with it, cry with it, work with it, play with it, yet how little we know about it. This is a larynx in action. The image our eyes have visualized appears deceptively simple, yet how complex on closer study. These chords are vibrating about 300 times a second, too fast for our eyes or for the ordinary motion picture camera to distinguish. The development of ultra-high-speed photography has given us a new picture of these rapid and complex movements. Photographed at approximately 5,000 frames or pictures per second, these vocal cords show the details of laryngeal function in exaggerated slow motion. This technique presents a new medium for laryngeal research and diagnosis. The casual observer sees little of the vigorous activity at the site of voice production. Note the position of the vocal cords deep in the larynx. Here is the airway leading from the lungs to the larynx, and thence via the pharynx, mouth, and nose to the outside. The vocal cords are protected by a firm shell of cartilage and connecting ligaments. The thyroid cartilage pivots on the cricoid cartilage. The epiglottis forms part of the protective mechanism from above. The arytenoids are directly concerned with the abduction and adduction of the vocal cords. In the light of recent observations, the rotatory motion pictured here should be replaced by a smooth lateral glide. The movements of these cartilages are accomplished by a complexity of different muscles. The result of these complex movements can be visualized with the aid of a mirror placed in the pharynx. The image of the larynx is reflected by the mirror to an observer or to a camera. We have chosen this indirect method of observation for our cinematographic studies because it permits visualization of the larynx under normal functional conditions. For the same reason, no local anesthetic has been used. In order to provide a simultaneous record of laryngeal function and voice production, it was necessary to exclude extraneous noises by sound treating our camera. This is a standard motion picture camera. After the patient has moved into position, a number of simultaneous photographs and recordings are obtained. This shows a female larynx producing normal sounds. Action and sound will be reproduced just as eye and ear perceive them. By contrast, here is a male larynx. Again, the voice was recorded while the larynx was photographed. Now let us slow down this hurried image by ultra-high-speed photography. Note the additional detail which now becomes apparent. While the basic tenets of indirect laryngoscopy hold for all forms of laryngeal photography, ultra-high speed requires special equipment. The light source must be of sufficient intensity to permit an exposure of 1/10,000th of a second. The cooling system reduces the intense heat generated by the lamp and prevents injury of the delicate tissues under observation. A diagonal mirror reflects the light onto the laryngeal mirror and thus illuminates the interior of the larynx. The laryngeal image, in turn, is reflected by the mirror to the high-speed camera. Transformers regulate the light intensity and the speed of the camera to permit exposure at speeds from 2,000 to 5,000 frames or pictures per second. In order to demonstrate the slow motion effect of such speeds, first note the oscillation of a watch spring as your eye or the ordinary camera perceives it. Now observe the same phenomenon at ultra-high speed as our special camera records it. The time element of the motion is magnified 200 times. This technique has enabled us to record several new observations on normal laryngeal physiology. You will see a new and different sequence of events when the cords abduct, asynchrony of vibration during normal phonation, and the complex motion of the loose mucous membrane during sound production. Similarly, newer concepts of arytenoid motion and the relation of length and mass to pitch are confirmed by high-speed photography. At such speeds, it becomes impossible to correlate the sound with the slow-motion picture. However, the recorded sound will be reproduced during each sequence. The noise of the camera may be heard in the background while it exposes 100 feet of film in 1 second. We have chosen this sound because it demonstrates a firm closure of the larynx with an abrupt release in one continuous rapid motion. While you may not recognize it in isolation, all of us produce this type of sound frequently to initiate a vowel. Singers have termed it coup de glotte. Note the motion of the vocal cords on their release. It is this motion which produces the first sound. While our patient repeated the sound several times at the beginning of the sequence for identification, you realize, of course, that the entire complex scene portrays just one sound. By now, the arytenoids have separated, and the exaggerated motion of the cords produces little or no sound. Note the marked relaxation of the cords and their flabby appearance. While this film does not reproduce as well as the standard color film, these pictures represent a new development in slow-motion photography of the larynx, color photography. Our next sound is a slow glide from low to high pitch. These pictures are taken from the beginning of the film where the pitch is low. Note the massive chords and the wide amplitude of each movement. This is characteristic of low pitch. The large globule of mucus appears to have no effect on the quality of the sound. This view represents a slightly higher pitch from the latter part of the same film strip. The vocal cords have lengthened somewhat, while the amplitude of the vibration has decreased. This is characteristic of the higher pitch range. The study of additional details of vocal cord behavior at ultra-slow motion requires the use of black and white film. Our first sequence shows laryngeal function at low pitch. Again, we observe the thickness of the vocal cords and the amplitude of the vibration, which are typical of the low tone range. In addition, we discover that the free margin of each vocal cord is not the thin linear structure we visualized before, but rather a thick shelf with upper and lower lips. The intricate motion of these lips suggests some basic changes from the traditional concept of laryngeal function. The next two series will present a brief glimpse of isolated, medium, and high-pitch sounds. Note the increasing length of the chords and the decrease in amplitude. You have just heard an octave glide. Within that brief time, many major laryngeal adjustments occur. In the lower ranges, the chords are shortened, massive, and relaxed. The vibrations are relatively slow. Observe here that the chords are elongating rapidly. As the pitch rises, they become tense and narrow. This lengthening of the vocal cords with rise in pitch seems a paradox, since a physical law maintains that the length of a vibrator is directly proportional to the frequency of vibration. While it is true that the larger male larynx produces lower tones than the smaller female larynx, lengthening of the chords in the same individual increases their elasticity and decreases their cross-sectional mass. This combination increases the frequency of vibration, which is associated with higher pitch. With the rise in pitch, the vocal cord movements of the patient have become slightly asynchronous. This is not uncommon and causes no apparent change in voice. Maximum lengthening of the chords for the octave glide has now occurred. The vocal cords are vibrating twice as fast as they did earlier in the scene. You will now be in a position to observe the complex laryngeal adjustments in reverse order as the pitch is lowered. The normal vibratory cycle consists of three separate phases: the opening, the closure, and the complete approximation. In the breathy voice pictured here, the last phase is eliminated. On the other hand, loudness increases the time of approximation. Whether the vibrations of the lateral laryngeal walls in the ventricular region influence the timbre of the voice, we do not know. We believe that the vigorous motion of the aryepiglottic folds is simply a byproduct of the vocal effort. The blood vessels on the surface of the cords mark the progression of the vibratory movement. The small collection of mucus at the posterior commissure indicates the nature of the movements in that area. As the pitch decreases more and more, we again note the thick double lip contour of the free borders of the vocal cords. This finding confirms the traditional concept of massive approximation in the lower pitch range. It is equally interesting to observe the sequence of events as the cords separate in abduction. Contrary to traditional teaching, the vocal cords separate first, to be followed by the vocal processes of the arytenoid cartilages. The abduction is then completed by lateral movement of these cartilages. This is a view of the larynx during inhalation and at the beginning of the multiple muscular adjustments which produce a coup de glotte. As the arytenoids approach each other, observe the smooth movement without rotation. The tremendous energy with which the arytenoids crash together in this type of phonation is revealed clearly in the compression of the vocal processes. After this posterior approximation, the soft tissues of the larynx close very rapidly. Note the sphincteric action of the supraglottic structures. The arytenoids advance forward and mesially. The ventricular folds and their surroundings shift toward the midline, and the anterior structures, primarily the epiglottis, move posteriorly. The release of this constriction is even more sudden and dynamic than the closure. The lateral and anterior parts of the larynx return to their customary open positions, but the arytenoids remain approximated to adjust for phonation. The overhanging epiglottis and the sphincteric action of the supraglottic structures prevent complete visibility of the first few vibrations during the release of a coup de glotte. It is evident, however, that the vocal cords are squeezed tightly together during several vibratory cycles. The coup de glotte resembles a cough, with one important variation. When a cough is released, the arytenoids abduct instantly to pull the cords apart and thus open the airway. In the coup de glotte, however, the arytenoids remain together to ready the vocal cords for phonation. We have seen that the entire larynx participates in the production of sound, not only the vocal cords. This short strip reveals the motion of the arytenoids and interarytenoid areas during phonation. Similarly, a cough affects every part of the larynx. What a violent eruption! Every particle is shaking. The epiglottis, the aryepiglottic folds, the true cords, and the associated soft tissues and cartilages. This extreme effort was reserved not for its sound effect, but for the protection and self-preservation of the individual. The human larynx, what a range of sound! What variety of function! How simple in appearance! How complex in its action! How beautiful and delicate in its effect! And how strong and powerful in its protection!